Good morning. So I've just finished another book and it was a comfort read. I very much needed a comfort read since the book before that had unsettled me, annoyed me, and engaged me in equal measures. But the underlying or the end feeling was a sense of insult and anger and unsettlement. I couldn't settle down to reading a brand new book. I felt a little bit betrayed by my to-read shelf because this book hadn't been unalloyed enjoyment that I'd expected it to be, even though the writing was good. I needed a comfort book. We all know the comfort book. The comfort book, like the comfort food or the comfort afternoon, is a literary experience that wraps you in warm arms like a favourite dressing gown or a comfortable throw rug. It warms you, it softens you, it reassures you that the universe is better than you thought it was, and it strengthens your fortitude for the future events, or in this case, books. Now, I've got many comfort reads. A large portion of this bookshelf that you see behind me that goes all the way to the ceiling, a large portion of that is books that I've read many times, and there's an element of comfort to many of them. There's more books over there. I've got heaps of comfort reads, but none of them felt quite right. Aside from anything else, I'd read most of them fairly recently, and my level of unsettlement meant that I was after something quite specific. I wanted humanity in my next book, which was extremely lacking in the one prior. And eventually, on the top shelf just behind me, I wonder if I can angle, right up near the top there, I finally found Sunburst. Sunburst by Phyllis Gotlieb is the only book I've ever read by this author. It actually had an award name for it. The Sunburst Award is a Canadian literary award that's given for speculative fiction, or was given for speculative fiction. It ran from 2001, and in 2020, due to COVID, they put it in hiatus. I'm not sure if it's ever come back. I don't think so. It's a shame. I haven't read a lot of books from that list, but the one or two that I have read were very good. Phyllis Gotlieb. She was a Canadian author and of science fiction and poetry. I haven't actually found any of her other books. It'd be interesting. I'm kind of keen to now. I really love this book. As you can see, this book is old and tattered. It shows signs of having been this very, very second-hand when I got it, and it was. This is not my first Sunburst book. My first Sunburst book, which had the same cover, though you could see the cover of my first one, finally fell apart. Its pages and spine and front cover all coming off due to excessive reading. This one's going the same way, but it's a book that I dearly love, even though I haven't actually read it apparently for almost 10 years, at least according to Goodreads. It knows everything about books. Not. So the irony didn't strike me until I was about 10 to 20 pages in, that in recovery from an old classic sci-fi book written in 1966, I was going to a classic old science fiction book written in 1964 in reaction to a book about telepaths and people with psi who were superhumans. I was going to a book about telepaths and people with psi who were definitely not superhumans. I was going from a post-apocalyptic to something that has elements of post-apocalyptic. This didn't actually strike me until I was firmly enveloped in Sunburst. This is a great book. It deserves to have an award an award named after it. And honestly, they should bring it back. The science fiction community has a bit of a dearth of awards right now. It's a bit of a gap to be filled. So, a little bit about Sunburst, which you may not have heard of, though you should have, because this is a fantastic book. It's a really spectacularly, beautifully written book. It is about science fiction, which I love, but the actual writing is amazing. The individual characterization is warm and cold in turns. It feels empathetic. It feels real. It feels like the person who wrote this book was interested in humanity and watched them and listened to them until she understood them. It was really everything that I needed. So it was written in the early 1960s, and it's set in the far, far future of 2020, which is kind of cute, from 2024. So it's a visionary novel from the 60s of what could happen in an American small ruralish town if a nuclear reactor exploded and leaked radiation everywhere. So when that happened in the town of Sorrel Park, which is the site of this book, they closed it down. Sorrel Park was a small, in the middle of nowhere type American town. A large number of its inhabitants were people, immigrants, usually from Europe. Apparently there'd been opened the gate in 88 or 19, something like that, where America called for a lot of immigrants. So they got a lot of immigrants from Europe. A lot of them settled in Sorrel Park and were working on the nuclear reactor when it exploded. So the leak in the radiation and the lack of trust that they felt that America would have in nuclear reactors after that meant that Sorrel Park got shut down by the military and was totally isolated from the rest of America. For 20 years, or about 20 years, nothing happened, except that Sorrel Park slowly died, with the only town still on coal power in America, and one suspects the world. We don't get a lot of world politics, but we understand that nuclear is really, really prevalent, which is science fiction in itself from the 1960s. So 20 years after this leak, which killed a lot of people, and a lot of people slowly died of radiation, etc., they feel that they've contained it and they understand it, and they're about to open up. And then a large group of teenagers, all from more or less troubled families, suddenly erupt with powerful, unanimously destructive psi powers. That's psi, PSI, psychokinetic powers. The story of the night when they erupt is kind of haunting. It's not particularly graphic, but it is very, very impressively scary in its understatedness. Anyway, they're kids. They're most of them in their early teens. I think the oldest is 18. And they're rounded up and they're kept in isolation, and a major scientist is brought in from outside to devise a shield which will stop their telepathic power, and they build the dump, as it comes to be known, where all the psi children are put, and any that are found in subsequent years. So initially, every year they pull in all the children from Sorrel Park and test them for psi powers. And so some new ones are added. I think when this story starts, there's about 30 of them in there. Now, we're going on about 10 years from that to our starting date, and we start with our leading lady, Shandy Johnson. And I'm going to read a bit from this book, which is a little bit naff, but I'm going to do it anyway, because the very start of this book has always hooked me in, and I've always loved it. So, Sunburst, Chapter 1. It was Shandy Johnson's 13th birthday, and she had celebrated by treating herself to a vanilla cone and a licorice stick, alternately blackening her tongue with one and whitening it with the other. She was about to step up onto the curb at 10th and Main when a boy who had been holding up the lamppost on their corner favoured her with a long whistle. She was startled. First, she looked back to see if he meant someone else. There was no one else. Then she glanced into the plate glass window of Finch's joint to see if she had turned within the last moment into something rich and strange. She hadn't. She was still a very tall, crane-like girl, rather sallow, with narrow torso in a navy sweatshirt and long blue jean legs, like articulated stovepipes. And I'll stop there. But it sets the scene so beautifully. It tells us so much about Shandy, and it's starting to hint at many things. The boy on the lamppost is the dump peeper. He's a boy with psi who's managed to not be put in the dump by going around and telepathically checking for other children who are developing psi. But Shandy knows she doesn't have it, so she isn't scared of him. The other thing, the vanilla cone and the licorice herald the fact that Sorrel Park's economy is completely and utterly collapsed. It has virtually no imports, virtually no exports, and virtually no work. So everyone there is living at what we would consider very baseline poverty. And it's in the past. It's been closed for about 30 years at this point. It's still completely living the past of the... Actually, it says 1950s. It must be living in must be more than 30 years since it closed. Never mind. Anyway, whatever. It's living in the past America. So Shandy Johnson presents as a happy-go-lucky, too smart for her own good, rather annoying kid. And while she's got no psi powers, she knows her world very well. She's virtually a street kid. She got orphaned early. Her father died from the radiation, her mother from something we never find out about. She became semi-adopted into a family who, I think she describes them at one point as dull normal. Lots of kids, lots of fights, lots of anger and over emotion, and lots of crime. So as a 5 or 6 year old, she's taking bootleg liquor from her adopted mother's still to deliver it. She knows the streets, and she knows Sorrel Park, and she knows people. And eventually she finds that the dump people is actually after her. Someone's dobbed her in. They don't use the word dob. I'm Australian. I use dob. And they've said that they don't think she's got psi, but there's something unusual about her. And it turns out that the whistle on the lamppost is because there is something unusual about her. She's an impervious. The person who can read anyone's thoughts in a room, and perhaps all of them at once, can't penetrate her brain, is completely impervious. She can't be affected by psi. She can't be telekinetically moved like most of them can do to most people. They can't affect her in that way. So this is Shandy's journey, and it's a bit of a coming of age, but kind of maybe, when she gets taken in and she's tested. And in many ways, this was an utterly visionary novel for the 1960s, because there was no young adult class of literature. And this is definitely young adult. Dystopian and post-apocalyptic. This is more post-apocalyptic than dystopian in a way. Those also weren't classes that people were writing that stuff. And yet this is a forerunner for so many classic types of book that are really, really beloved today. So it has dated in some ways, though I think not so badly. I think it's now more suited to an adult who can emphasize more with the era than it would to some children. Some children are very advanced readers, and I'm sure it would work for them. It's not so much action-packed as character-packed. So the super intelligent Shandy wants to understand the question of psi, and she wants to understand the question of the young people who are locked up in the dump. And she wants to understand herself. So the novel is while it's science fiction, the science in question is more psychological and the soft sciences, if you will. You've got Rorschach tests, body typing, the writings of Margaret Mead, many of which are discredited. I don't think body typing is in fashion at the moment, though it was in the 60s. Margaret Mead has been somewhat disproved, but a lot of the core ways in which Shandy explores herself and her world are still good reading and good science. Well, I say it's not action-packed. The first half isn't. And no spoilers. But at one point, the kids in the dump escape. And from then on, the last half is pretty action-packed. And there's a lot of unexpected things there. But basically, it's the beauty of the humanity and the exploration of humanity that makes this an amazing book. What else to say about it? I last read it a couple of years ago, apparently. I thought it had been longer. Every time I reread it, it's fresh. When I first got it, I think I probably reread it once a year. And so I'm very familiar with it. But because of the beauty of the writing, if you've got beautiful writing, it doesn't much matter if you know what's about to happen or if you recognize the words of what's happening. It's the actual cadence of the writing. Like listening to a good song that you've heard before. It isn't so much the fact that it has to be new each time. It's the fact that the music or the good writing move you through emotional sequences and mental sequences that you enjoy. And that is your comfort read. And that is your favorite song. And that is very much Starburst. I hope this book lasts a little bit longer. I'll start looking around for a new one because I don't think it'll last that much longer. And I bitterly resent whoever it was who decided to write all over their copy. But maybe they didn't love it as much as I do. No idea how. You've got suites of characters, and not only do you have good main characters like Shandy or Jason, you've got suites of characters that interact. So even books that have interesting individual characters, it's a whole different thing writing a group that are interacting. And I remember reading once something about how hard they were to write, because you've got one person and their world is from inside themselves, or you can have it in third person. Then you've got a second person, and you've got those outside worlds as well as the interaction of the two. But for every person you add, you've got this web of interactions, and you have to somehow position every single one of those characters within the web in order for a conversation, a dinner party, an interaction to be meaningful. And you always have ones that are more heavily weighted than others because you can't weight them all equally. So there's one scene in here, for example, where Shandy's in a helicopter with with everyone else hypnotized because she's impervious and she's the only one that the dumplings can't read. And you've got this level of characters. You've got characters that are known and understood, and the weirdness of Shandy seeing them without them actually seeming to be in their bodies. And then you've got the extra characters of the crew of the helicopter who are flying it. You've got this range of interactions, and you've got Shandy as our main character who feels incredibly isolated. Yes, so there's a lot good that can be said about this book. I'm sure other people have given it much more literary reviews, but I think this is a marvellous book. I think it's beautifully written. I now actually do want to go out on the interwebs and find more Phyllis Gotlieb. Have you ever read more Phyllis Gotlieb? If anyone out there has ever read anything of hers, I'd like to hear. I'd like to hear if it's Sunburst, of course, but if it's anything else, I'm especially curious. Because Wikipedia has got a list of over 10 books of hers, and I don't think I've ever seen a single one of them. And I would like to. Anyway, have a great day. Read good books.